She was the last person anyone expected to see in that building, not because Oprah Winfrey didn't go to concerts, not because she didn't know who Tupac Shakur was, but because for 2 years, Oprah Winfrey had been one of the most prominent voices in America saying that music like Tupac's was a problem, that it was dangerous, that it was doing something to the culture that needed to be addressed. She had said it on her show, in interviews, at events where powerful people gathered to discuss what was happening to America's children. She had never said Tupac's name specifically. She didn't need to. Everyone knew who she meant. And now she was here, standing in the wings of the Forum in Inglewood, California, on June 4, 1996, while 30,000 people screamed for the man she had spent 2 years talking about in rooms he was never invited into. Nobody in Tupac's camp had told him she was there. That was the first mistake. The people who worked at the Forum that night said they had never seen a crowd that size go that quiet that fast. Not from shock exactly, from something closer to collective breath-holding. The kind of silence that happens when a room full of people simultaneously realizes that what they are watching is not entertainment anymore, that it is something real. But we are getting ahead of the story. To understand what happened when Tupac found out, you have to understand what 1996 meant for him. Not the mythology of it, not the version that gets told in documentaries about the tragedy of what was about to happen, the actual texture of being Tupac Shakur. In the summer of 1996, he was 24 years old, and he was on fire. All Eyes on Me had come out in February, the first double album in hip-hop history. 40 tracks, a statement of such overwhelming creative force that even the people who had spent years trying to dismiss him had run out of language to do it. The album had gone to #1. It had stayed there. California Love was playing in gas stations and grocery stores, and at the kind of parties where people didn't usually listen to Tupac. He had crossed over not by softening what he was, but by being so much of what he was that the culture had no choice but to absorb him. He had also spent those months making what would turn out to be his final recordings, though nobody knew that yet. He was recording at a pace that people around him described as possessed, songs piling up faster than they could be processed, verses that seemed to come from somewhere beyond normal creative capacity. There was an urgency to it that his closest collaborators noticed but didn't fully understand until later, when the urgency had an explanation that nobody wanted. He was performing constantly. The Forum show on June 4th was part of a run of Los Angeles dates selling out in under an hour. 30,000 people, night after night, in the city that had made him and broken him and made him again. When he walked onto that stage in Inglewood, he was not performing for an audience. He was coming home. And Oprah Winfrey was standing in the wings. She had not come to confront him. That's the part that gets lost in the telling. She had come because someone in her circle, a producer, a journalist she trusted, had told her that if she wanted to understand what Tupac Shakur actually was, as opposed to what the discourse around him had made him, she needed to be in the room when it was happening. She had agreed, with the kind of cautious, investigative openness that had made her show what it was. She was not a woman who made decisions based on incomplete information. She came to see. She had watched from the wings for almost an hour. She had watched him command 30,000 people with a precision and authority that she recognized, the voice, the presence, the ability to make a room of strangers feel like they were being spoken to individually. She had watched the crowd respond to him with something beyond fan energy. It was the response of people who felt understood, who felt that someone was speaking the truth about their lives in a language the mainstream had been refusing to use. She was, by the accounts of the people around her that night, moved, not converted, not certain, but moved in the specific way of someone whose assumptions are being complicated by direct experience. The people with her noticed the shift. They had expected her to watch for 20 minutes, form an impression, and leave before the show ended. That had been the plan. She was still there an hour later. She had not moved from her position in the wings. Her eyes had not left the stage. Then Tupac's road manager, scanning the wings during a song break, saw her. He went pale. He looked at the people around him to confirm what he was seeing. Then he did what he had been hired to do. He told Tupac. The song that was playing when Tupac found out was Keep Ya Head Up. This matters because Keep Ya Head Up is the song that Tupac had written as a direct response to every person who had ever accused hip-hop of hating women. It was a song addressed to black women specifically, acknowledging the ways the world had failed them, the ways men had failed them, the ways the system had ground them down and kept grinding. It was arguably the most tender, most morally serious piece of music he had ever recorded, and it was the song that was playing when he found out the woman who had spent 2 years defining him by his angriest work was standing 20 feet away from the stage watching him sing it. He finished the verse. He finished the verse. He did not break, did not look toward the wings, did not let the 30,000 people feel anything shift in the room. He finished the verse, let the music carry the chorus, and then, in the breath between one song and the next, in the space that performers use for water and microphone checks and the invisible logistics of keeping a show alive, he walked to the wings. He and Oprah Winfrey looked at each other. Nobody recorded what was said in that moment. The people who were present, the road manager, 2 security staff, a lighting technician who happened to be standing nearby, all gave different accounts in the years that followed. But they agreed on the broad shape of it. They agreed that it was short, that it was not angry, not in the way that the situation might have produced anger. And they agreed that it ended with Tupac walking back to the stage and saying, over his shoulder, 3 words, "Come out here." What happened next, in front of 30,000 people at the Forum in Inglewood, had never happened before and has not happened since. Oprah Winfrey walked onto a hip-hop stage. The crowd's reaction was not what you might expect. It was not jeering or hostility or the sound of 30,000 people processing a contradiction. It was silence. The specific electric silence of a crowd that has just seen something so genuinely unexpected that the normal vocabulary of response doesn't apply. People were nudging each other. People were pointing. People were checking the faces of the people around them to confirm that they were seeing the same thing. Tupac let the silence hold for a moment. Then he said, into the microphone, in a voice that carried to every corner of that arena, "I want you to meet somebody. This is Oprah Winfrey." The silence broke. It did not break into cheering or booing. It broke into something more complicated. The sound of 30,000 people not knowing exactly what they felt and expressing that uncertainty all at once. Oprah stood at the edge of the stage. She was not performing composure. She actually was composed in the way of someone who has been in enough difficult rooms to know how to stand in one. But the people near the front of the crowd could see that she was also uncertain in a way that was real and unmanaged. She was not in her environment. She was in his. Tupac looked at her. Then he looked at the crowd. Then he said something that became, in the years that followed, the most quoted moment of that entire night. "I want to ask you something," he said to her, his voice carrying the same intensity it carried when he was performing. "In front of all these people, because these are the people you've been talking about." The conversation that happened on that stage lasted 11 minutes. 11 minutes in front of 30,000 people, between 2 of the most recognizable black voices in America, about the thing that had been sitting between them without ever being said directly. Tupac went first. He did not come out swinging. He came out with something more difficult than aggression. He came out with specificity. He talked about "Dear Mama." He talked about "Keep Ya Head Up," the song that had been playing when he walked into the wings. He talked about the women in his life. His mother Afeni, his aunt, the women in his neighborhood who had raised him and half the other children on the block, because the men had been taken away by the same systems he rapped about. He said, "When you talk about this music on your show, you pick the worst of it. You find the line that sounds the most violent, the most ugly, and you play it for your audience and you say this is what it is. But you don't play Dear Mama. You don't play Keep Ya Head Up. Why not?" Oprah was quiet for a moment. 30,000 people held their breath. Then she said something that nobody expected. She said, "You're right." Not a full concession, not a capitulation. 2 words that acknowledged the specific point he had made, clearly and directly, in a way that public figures almost never do in public. She said, "You're right that I've used the worst examples. I've done that because the worst examples are the ones that frighten me. I'm a woman who grew up with violence, and I have a platform that reaches a lot of young people, and when I hear certain things in certain music, I react to it from that place. But you're right that it's not the whole picture." Tupac stared at her. The crowd was still barely breathing. "Then say that," he said, "on your show, in front of your audience. Say it the way you just said it to me." What followed in those remaining minutes was not a resolution. It was not a reconciliation, not a made-for-television moment of understanding that wrapped everything up neatly and sent everyone home with a lesson learned. Real conversations between people who have been talking past each other for years don't work like that. They're messier. They circle back. They surface old wounds and leave some of them open. Tupac talked about what it felt like to be 24 years old and have your most complicated work reduced to its most marketable controversy. He talked about the specific exhaustion of being a black man, whose anger was legible to mainstream America only as threat, never as testimony. He said, "Everything I'm angry about is real. The poverty is real. The police is real. The prison system is real. I didn't invent any of it. I'm just the one talking about it in a way that people can't ignore." He talked about his mother, about Oprah Shakur, who had been arrested while she was pregnant with him, who had raised him in shelters and borrowed rooms and whatever space was available, who had taught him that the truth about how people lived was not something you were allowed to look away from just because looking at it was uncomfortable. He said, "My mother taught me to tell the truth about what I see. That's all I'm doing. And somehow that makes me dangerous." Oprah talked about responsibility, about platform, about the specific weight of having access to an audience of tens of millions of people and the choices you make about what to do with that access. She was not defensive. She was, in the accounts of people who were there, genuinely grappling with something in real time, working through a tension between her own convictions and the challenge Tupac had just put directly in front of her. She talked about the women who watched her show, about the letters she received from mothers who were afraid for their sons, who felt that certain music was pulling their children towards something that would destroy them. She said, "I am responsible to those women, to those mothers. When I make decisions about what to put on my platform, they are in the room with me." Tupac was quiet for a moment. The crowd, 30,000 people who had been listening to every word, went quieter. Then he said, "So am I. Every mother who's lost a son to the streets, every woman who's had to raise children alone because their father got taken away, they're in every song I write. That's who I'm writing for. We're responsible to the same people. We're just doing it differently." At one point, someone in the crowd, not shouting but loud enough to carry, called out, "Let her talk, Pac." Tupac stopped, looked at the crowd, smiled, in the way he smiled when something caught him off guard. "She can talk," he said. "That's why I brought her out here." That moment, that small, human moment in the middle of everything else, was what the people who were there remembered most clearly. Not the arguments, not the positions. That moment when 30,000 people laughed together at the same thing, and Tupac and Oprah were both part of the laugh. When it was over, when Tupac had said what he had come to say and Oprah had said what she had come to say, and the 11 minutes had run their course, Tupac looked at her one more time. "Come back to the show," he said. "Not the concert, his show, his work. Come back when you've heard all of it." Oprah looked at him for a long moment. "I will," she said. She walked off the stage. Tupac turned back to 30,000 people who had just watched something they couldn't quite name, and he finished the concert. The music that came after that conversation was different. The people who were there said it felt looser, more open, like something had been released that Tupac had been holding for a long time. He played longer than scheduled. He brought people from the crowd onto the stage. He played Dear Mama with a quiet intensity that made the women in the front rows cry, and he watched them cry without looking away. He died 94 days later. The thing about Tupac Shakur is that the mythology of him tends to crowd out the reality of him. The mythology is powerful. The martyred voice, the prophet who saw his own end coming, the revolutionary destroyed by the same forces he was fighting. It is not wrong, it is just incomplete. The reality is that he was 24 years old and still figuring things out, still navigating the argument between the different parts of himself, the rage and the tenderness, the street and the politics, the man who wrote Dear Mama, and the man who understood that tenderness alone was not enough. He was not a finished person. He was a person who was becoming and who ran out of time before the becoming was done. The night he pulled Oprah onto his stage, he was not making a calculated statement. He was doing what he always did when he felt something deeply enough, saying it directly, to the person it needed to be said to, without waiting for a safer moment. That was who he was. Oprah talked about that night only once publicly, in 1997. She said she had been wrong about the way she was handling something important, and that a 24-year-old man in front of 30,000 people had told her so directly she could not pretend not to have heard it. She said, "I went there to understand him. I think what happened is that I did." 30,000 people watched it happen. They walked out of the forum that night, carrying something that didn't have a name yet. Something about what it looked like when two people defined by their opposition to each other finally stood in the same room and said true things. Some of them are still carrying